Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. In this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a recording from a recent installment in our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours, featuring Pedro Matos. Pedro is a member of the Darden faculty and the academic director for the Richard A. Mayo Center for Asset Management here at the Darden School of Business. In this wide-ranging conversation, we talk with Pedro about his background, what led him to Darden, some of the classes he currently teaches, his role as academic director for Darden Capital Management, his interest in ESG investing, and much, much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with Pedro Matos. Well, welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest installment in our ongoing faculty conversation series, what we call Office Hours. I'm Brett Twitty, member of the admissions committee here at the Darden School of Business, and pleased to be joined today all the way from Barcelona, from the PRI conference, as you can see by his background, Pedro Matos. And Pedro is a Darden faculty member here, and he's also the academic director for the Richard A. Mayo Center for Asset Management at the Darden School of Business. So as we said in our promotional emails, we're going to get into a lot of things. If you're curious about ESG investing, what Pedro's been up to at this particular conference, what some of the classes he teaches, we're going to cover a lot of ground in this conversation. We'll just say as we get started here, first 10, 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk about Pedro's background and then kind of transition into, the classes that he teaches, ESG, some of these things that he researches on as well. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to ask in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on that. But Pedro, let me get out of the way here and allow you to introduce yourself. So you're calling from the PRI conference. What is the PRI conference?
Well, thanks, Brett, for the chance, and thanks everyone for joining. So technically, I'm at the airport, Barcelona airport, but I just came out of this big conference center, and after 2 years of hiatus during the pandemic, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and I'll speak what they actually do. They've just had their flagship PI in person. And you could also join online, but it was the world's biggest gathering on responsible investing or ESG investing. So what is the responsible investing? Just to set stages, you go through these principles. Principle number one is that you incorporate environmental, E, social, S, and corporate governance, G, issues into investment analysis and decision. And then they have other principles, and you can walk through that, but they are, setting the stage of how does one incorporate, environmental, social, and governance, ESG principles into investing.
And how was the conference? I'm sure it was great to be back in person after a couple of years of hiatus.
I can tell you that I wasn't used to being auditoriums with 5,000 people anymore. And it's cool. Like Barcelona is a great design city. The conference center is beautiful. And we were literally on the beach. But it's just mind blowing that we were away for 3 years. The last one I've been was in Paris, 2019. Before that was San Francisco, and next year hopefully we'll be in Tokyo. So they move around the world, and you get people flying from all over. But there was also an online version. Some folks from China had to connect through Zoom, remotely and so forth.
And I want to decode your background a little bit here for people who are wondering. So it's been a big week for you. In the on my left-hand corner, it's you on a stage. So you were a speaker at this, panelist at this conference. And then you also had an Economist article published, correct?
Yes, this happened on the same day pretty much. So there's really the big stage. That's the 5,000 auditorium you expect from a large city's conference center. That's not where Pedro spoke. I spoke down here in one of the side rooms, and there are, a few hundred people. But and on the what's called the academic network. So we bridge the world between academic research on ESG and practitioners on ESG, and we have sessions together. But at the same time, this weekend's Economist, the flagship financial publication, they actually covered my research, which put me a little bit on the spot, because my research says that ESG investing is not the same in the US as it is elsewhere. And if in some ways, so the title here is green, dubious green funds are rampant in America. It's very catchy title. The papers and the research is more tamed, but basically saying there's a disconnect between what is ESG investing, I apologize, in the US versus in other places in the world where it's perhaps more pervasive or it's more mature.
All right. Well, we might get into that a little bit later in this session, but tell us a little bit more about you and your background, Pedro.
Of course, yeah. It's very hard to say who's Pedro. I've lived and worked in 4 countries. I've been a bit of a creature of globalization. So I was born in Portugal, and my family is still there. That's my next stop as I fly through Lisbon back to the States. And I spent I was born there, but then I spent part of my youth in Macau. At the time, it was a Portuguese territory. It's very next to Hong Kong. And as they decided to return both Hong Kong and Macau was also decided to return to China, of course. And so I actually witnessed the early stages of China's economic transition in this late 1980s, I would say. To me, that was like super powerful to see, this huge transformation. Whereas whenever I go back to Europe, everything is the same. So I go back to my hometown, Lisbon. Those buildings have been around for hundreds of years, and everything, looks the same. In China, everything was changing in my early years. I moved back and studied in Portugal. I can tell you more later about what I studied and then when my professional career. But Portugal was transforming itself at the time as well. We were joining the euro, the currency. We had joined the EU before that. And literally it was a time of transformation in my own country. We were, becoming more developed. I did my grad school in INSEAD, which is a business school, competes with Darden on the global stage for a well-known MBA program. But my MBA turned into a PhD. That took a little bit longer. And then I moved to the States. So I became a faculty first in California, University of Southern California. And then I moved later to Virginia, to the University, to Darden School of Business. And I've been there for the last 11 years. Now, if you count all these countries, etc., some people might count 4. So Portugal, China, if you like, France and the US. Some people might count 5 if you think that Virginia and California are 2 different countries. But it's been really a privilege to be able to work and live and experience all these different environments. But I can tell you, Charlottesville is a great place. So.
Well, I had to apologize to Pedro for scheduling this at the same time as the Portugal-South Korea game. So
yes, for the World Cup.
Yes, for any of you who are following the World Cup, let us know if there are any updates in the Q&A. So, Pedro, interesting question to ask faculty is just how did you get interested in finance, this subject matter area where you've obviously devoted your life and career?
Yeah. So I started taking a lot of classes during my econ undergrad, economics degree. And I actually decided to go into a career into asset management, something we'll talk about later. I was in Portugal at a reasonably sized mutual fund manager. And but then I actually jumped over and took another look at financial markets from another side, from the bond market side. So I was recruited to issue government bonds for Portugal, for my own country, for the Republic of Portugal. And then a little bit later, I also consulted with the World Bank. So I was taken as an expert, given all that we had done in the Portuguese bond market, and I went with the World Bank to LATAM. So I went to Colombia, Brazil, Peru. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Most of the teams at the World Bank had people with PhDs and master's degrees, etc. And I was the only one without one. And, it kind of became obvious that, on the next stepping stone, I had to go to grad school. But I confess, once I went to grad school, I started hesitating. Should I go back to industry? And the short answer is no. I just said, school is so great. Why don't I stay in school forever and become a professor? So, and that, sort of led me to the first job in the US at USC and now here at Darden.
Well, what led you to Darden? How did you decide this is where I want to be?
Yeah, there are many different business schools out there. Many different ways. And INSEAD is one of place where there's a lot of connections between the world of practice and academia. And I particularly like Darden in that respect. Darden also has a global perspective. It has an international focus. And I really like my academic life as this composite between research, engagement with practitioners, and teaching. And so having had that professional background first, teaching some of those materials myself in class, I continue to learn from the students, of course, and their diverse backgrounds. But really, Darden for me is this unique combination of everything I think we should do as a school, which is have thought leadership, do the research, the hard work, bring that to practice like I'm doing here in Barcelona at this flagship conference, learn from practice, and then bring that to the classroom and to the teaching, but also then learn from the students and then go back and actually, go on this circle again. And basically, as I said, I want to stay in school forever and sort of be learning and getting insights from others. And this is like a perfect loop for me, and I hope for many others as well.
I appreciate you noting that point about the research and this connection to practical affairs. It's something that's come through on all of these office hours conversations, the extent to which when faculty are looking at things and working on kind of problems and doing their research, they're thinking about actual practitioners. It's not some sort of pie in the sky, ivory tower type situation. So we've got a question about the Mayo Center. It's a good time to kind of transition a little bit to talk about the Mayo Center. You're the academic director for the Mayo Center for Asset Management. Tell us a little bit more about what the Mayo Center is.
Yeah, so it's named after the Richard A. Mayo, who was an alum, and he was a leader of a very large asset manager and luckily a Darden graduate. And he approached the school and the faculty around this creation of a center of excellence around the study and the practice of asset management. So what do we mean by asset management, just to sort things out? It's sort of like preserving and growing wealth for investors. And so how do we, advance that at the center? We do hopefully world-class research. So things that one day, like this weekend, shows up in The Economist would be considered, high-level research. But we also develop educational programs, and I'll talk about that, the activities. And we support a lot of the student clubs and the experiential learning there as well. So as I said, we're one of the centers of excellence. There are others on innovation, etc. And we fall under that, overall Darden's mission to, when we develop this investment community or help develop it, we think about responsible stewards of the wealth and inspiring, leaderships. So we do have that, overarching Darden mission behind us, but we are more directed at the world of asset management. And I can speak more what is asset management, perhaps. So I don't invest directly myself. I've I did that when I was more day to day in financial markets. I had a Bloomberg terminal and I have everything, and I felt like maybe I had a slight edge here and there to buy and sell. I actually bought and sold futures rather than stocks, but most investors they hire external managers. So what we do is I actually, most of my savings I have that through a pension plan. The pension plan itself hires a mutual fund manager or an external manager. More high net worth individuals, they hire perhaps private bank. The private bank may get them more unique fund offerings like hedge funds, private equity, and alternative asset classes. So I don't buy directly shares or bonds or all these financial securities, but I invest through this asset managers or investment management companies, and they've become very big. So it's not just me; it's pretty much around the world, not just in the U.S. and not just here in Europe. And now this, what we call institutional investors, so asset management firms. So they're investors managing money for other people. They now hold the majority of the shares around the world, and the majority of publicly listed companies. And it's much higher even in the U.S. It's like 75% upwards of that. They help me. Why? Because they help me diversify. What does that mean? I would not have the capability even to analyze hundreds of stocks or thousands of opportunities out there. And the same goes for bonds. So they do that. And they do that not just locally for me, for example, in US stocks, but across the world. And they become crucial suppliers of capital to firms all over the world. And a lot of my research focuses on this set of investors, the institutional investors, the asset management firms.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. It's always helpful. Sometimes we worry when we have these kind of business school conversations, something like asset management. People are like, "What exactly does that mean?" So, thank you for walking us through all of that. You are also the faculty advisor to Darden Capital Management. This is one of the experiential learning opportunities that exist for students here at the Darden School of Business. So tell us a little bit more about what Darden Capital Management is.
Sure. So this is one of the educational opportunities you have here around asset management, or I should say responsible asset management. So we select 28 second-year students to actually be in charge of managing and investing 6 investment portfolios for the Darden School Foundation. They earn credit for their participation as portfolio managers of the fund. And I can walk you through our latest additions to the fund, which is focused on real estate investing. But this all started in the 90s, and the Darden School Foundation recognized that the best preparation for careers in this industry and having hands-on investment management experience was they earmarked some money and that from the overall endowment and allocated it to the students, so the students would manage this. As of this more recent quarter, the assets have grown to over $25 million across the 6 funds. So we are one of the largest programs of its kind in the world. I think the largest. We have, all these individual funds. You can find all of that on our website, the Mayo Center website. And they focus on different strategies: value investing, international investing, ESG investing, which we will talk about soon, real estate investing, what was the latest edition. They do all the investment analysis. So they pitch stocks, and then make a determination to add or not to the portfolio, and they manage the portfolio. So how do they buy, and how do they scale down? When do they exit? And every year, these 28 students rotate. So then the next class comes about. And I can walk you through a little bit how they manage this on a daily basis, but they basically meet once a week. They examine new ideas, adjust the portfolio, and they also run it as a club. And that club sponsors some events. So leading professionals come back to school, and or they participate also in external stock pitch competitions and compete against other teams from other schools. And they network also for career opportunities. They have job tracks. They do everything else, like stay in touch with alumni. That there's been several hundreds by now that have gone through this program, and they publish a quarterly newsletter, and so forth. So there's, and what I'm doing is very little, I should say. So I stay there as their faculty advisor. So I'm somewhat responsible. I will assign a grade on an individual basis based on the quality of the pitches, which I observe and participate. But also I would collect 360 feedback from the other students and so forth. So I don't know if you want to hear also about the latest edition. So how do you, how does each of these funds come about? So we've just recently launched a new fund, which is called the Colonnade Fund. And that's a very Virginian or, Jeffersonian name. Colonnades are the, columns in the architectural design of our campus. And because this is real estate, it's like the built environment. This is, we're investing into real assets. Buildings can be, companies that themselves invest in industrial parks or offices or housing or whatnot. So hotels, lodging, and so forth. But they do this through what's called real estate investment trusts, which are listed in public markets in the US and all over the world. And they do the same type of analysis that the other funds do, the bottoms-up research, which goes through the financials, what is attractive of each of these possible equity real estate investment trusts, and they strive to hold an allocation towards those REITs. But they can also venture outside REITs and go to any company that's real estate adjacent. And there are many, things that are real estate heavy, but not necessarily technically a REIT. And they seek to outperform a benchmark, sort of an index that they're measured against. And we kind of reward them, but not monetarily, of course, that they would outperform, what their mandate calls for, this index. But they fall under the, broader goals of the Darden Capital Management. Again, hands-on experience, because getting careers into real estate or broader investment management around real estate is hard. And you can kind of leverage this experiential learning into career search. As I said, there've been numerous alumni have spoken to this particular fund. There's been training by former alumni also on this, and that opens the door to how do I, consider a possible career in this space.
So a couple practical questions for you that we've gotten here in the Q&A. So some people naturally hearing about this are like, gosh, this is really cool. How do people get involved with Darden Capital Management?
Yes. So they apply and that's going to come up now in February. And the sort of halfway through their first year, they first start to participate in the club activities purely as club members. So they come in and sit on the back and watch the second year's pitch stocks. They ask questions, etc. They come through the club events, hear other speakers. They participate. There are happy hours. There's also lots of fun around this club, of course, fun activities. And they get excited, and then they put together an application which is short, like a one-pager, where does telling me, the faculty advisor, how does this fit their Darden journey and their career, and so forth. And so then I looked through those. I have to make very hard choices, and many times, because I want to bring people that have no experience. And so this can be that transformational learning experience for them, together with people who have experience, because at Darden, a lot of the learning is peer learning. It's not from Pedro, the faculty, to the students. Is as much that as it is between the students. So then I have to assemble teams. So there's 4 members of each fund team, a senior portfolio manager and 3 individual portfolio managers, and they have to work as a team through the academic year. So I want to make sure I have a good diversity of backgrounds, of skills, and so forth. Or people who are seeking those skills and seeking those learning opportunities, so that there's this peer learning between them. And then there's 4 other students that are called the executive team: a CEO, a chief investment officer, a director of research, and a CFO who manage other activities for this. Like they, for example, they do the training. So they train everyone else across the funds on systems like, as I said, Bloomberg, FactSet, S&P, everything that we have. We have basically a capital markets room at Darden, and there's a lot of financial terminals, financial data, and you get some training on how do I get all the financials I need to conduct the investment analysis. So a lot of that is taken care by the executive team with my help. And then they also put together a conference themselves, which is a student competition, the Darden at Virginia Investment competition, and that where they organize locally one of the best stock pitch competitions where schools from all over the world also come in. So there's all these other activities that the executive team manages. So I have to look for 28 students, but I usually have a very hard time making this because there are a lot more applications than just the 28, of course.
Well, as I mentioned, we've gotten some really good questions about Darden Capital Management. I want to stay here for just a few more minutes before we go on to talking about some of the other classes that you teach. So one question is, okay, you mentioned that students who may not have any prior experience with asset management, this kind of blend of students, some with a lot of experience, some with no prior experience. How do students even orient to something like asset management if they don't know anything about it previously? They're here to learn. Does it come from their first year finance class?
Exactly.
I'm curious.
So I also teach in those classes. So I know that a lot of the tools we use there can be used for security analysis to basically make a determination whether one should buy or make an investment into a stock, or one should not buy or sell a stock. You can even short a stock. I don't want to go too technical here, but the tools are learned through the first year, but the students also learn from each other through the club events, right? So they come into the club to the fund meetings. So they learn from the second years as each of the second years pitch stocks from their discussion. And then we have, once you're selected, which you are selected. So if you apply in February, you're selected at the end of February. You'll have a period from March, April, and into early May, which is our last quarter, where you sit together. The 28 students of the first and the second year are co-managing the fund. And you will actually co-pitch with second year. So your first pitch is together with a second year that has gone through the cycle before. And you also learn about all the stocks that have been in the portfolio. So that whole, we write book reports, like summarizing what's the thesis for holding for each particular investment. What are the updates? What has played out? Might something have broken the thesis or the original idea behind the investments? And so you start to get that in your last quarter of the first year. You're still not earning credit, but you are already taking, part of the fund. And then after the summer, you become full. Actually, April 1st, you're formally the new team, but after the summer, you start earning the course credit for it.
Well, I love what you shared about the second year, first year interactions. That's for our attendees here who are just learning about Darden. This cross-class connection, this is a big part of the Darden experience. You can look at it in a lot of different ways, whether it's the sort of academic experience, as Pedro was talking about here. It's also very present in the career process. Second year coaches, you may have heard about these, like students who actively coach first year students as they're going through that recruitment process. There's all kinds of clubs and organizations structured around career interests that also help with that second year to first year knowledge share. And of course, just socially, right? This is part of the Darden community interaction too. So another good question that we've gotten here is, well, all right, your first year, people probably heard about the case method and the core curriculum, and then you move into electives. And this is the structure of all of our MBA formats here. And many of the electives in the second year will have an experiential component to them. Darden Capital Management is a very vivid example of this. How do you see experiential opportunities like Darden Capital Management fitting within the overall academic experience here at Darden?
Yeah. So the case method is, I think about it as like learning a foreign language. Here I am in Barcelona, and of course they will insist not to speak Spanish, but Catalan. But like the only way you can really learn, and maybe I've been privileged in that respect, is to go and live in that foreign country. So you go into a marketing class. I'm, not a marketing expert, but then I'm all of a sudden in this different world, or an operations class, or a strategy class, etc. And the same goes for finance. So first you go on this journey where you start to sort of experience different countries, different languages, and you kind of, learning that language in a very uncomfortable environment, which is like everyone seems to know it except you. But it's still controlled. We still have the case, and the case facts are the case facts, and there's some sense of what is the appropriate decision that the group will reach. But that's nowhere close to the real world. The real world does not have the case written for you, and so this is a one level up of like that journey of like, going in these journeys, across all these foreign lands in all these different places. But now you're faced with, even more uncertainty, which is, thrown at you of like, you have to make a choice. You are, in the case of the Darden Capital Management, the experiential course, you're given capital to go out and actually invest. And you have to there's no sitting still. Sitting still is not an option in capital markets. So you have to make a choice. And that is, the advantage of some of the second year more experiential courses is to go off from, one level up from the case method to deal with in more, real world environment.
All right, well, we're going to transition and talk about a couple of electives that you're involved with. The first is a reading seminar, which these are also part of the elective lineup. The reading seminar you're involved with is the Mayo Center Reading Seminar, and you lead that along with Dick Mayo, Richard Mayo, who's been mentioned here, as well as a former dean of the Darden School of Business, Bob Bruner, who is a big reader himself. Every, I think, December or so, he puts out, these are my favorite books of the year list, which is great. So tell us a little bit more about this reading seminar.
Yeah, so I've been very privileged to learn a lot from Bob, who's, we just awarded him a service award for his time at Darden, and Dick and Dick Mayo, and the namesake for the Mayo Center, and Bob Bruner, they had started kind of a little bit what Thomas Jefferson envisioned as a reading seminar, which is, you meet once a month, you go and read books and discuss books as a team. So they started from kind of the history of financial markets. And then where I came along was merging that idea with the kind of the history of asset management, and compare different strategies and the different evolution of asset management. So in asset management, we have two schools of thought, pretty much. Do you trust the human or do you trust the method? So human would be a fundamental approach, fundamental analysis, where, kind of what I described Darden Capital Management does. You go through bottoms-up research on the company's financials, and you come with a recommendation and make a decision. But there's also more quantitative tools, and quantitative asset managers who do more statistical analysis, use more, other tools that have come, some of which have come from academic research, and some of it from other fields and not beyond finance. So, as I said, Bob, Dick, and myself, we pick books that we think are important, or we ourselves are very interested to read on all these different topics. On that first part of fundamental investing, a core book is a book around value investing. Value investing is kind of the foundation of how we do financial security analysis, financial analysis. So there's a legendary Graham, and then there was Warren Buffett. Some of you might have heard the name. He's into his 90s. He still draws huge crowds into Omaha every year. So that type of philosophy. So we read a book on that. But then there's an evolution, and some investors, instead of looking for value, they look for growth. So, like, for example, the latest book we had in the series was on the platform companies. So what are platform companies? Facebook's, the now called Meta, the Google, also now called Alphabet, Amazon, and Netflix, etc. This type of companies, and they've become winners and losers in this age of tech titans. And so, what is when we started, of course, several years ago, they were on the way up, through the pandemic even more so, and now they're kind of coming down. So this tension between these companies that are very growth-oriented versus companies that are more value-oriented is, we handle with these two books. And then, for example, just the next book is Beyond Public Markets, or publicly listed companies, to private markets, what the growth of Silicon Valley, of venture capital, the growth of, private investing. And so there's a recent book called The Power Law, which we read. And now, actually, this coming week, so as I fly back, I don't have it with me here, but the book we're reading is on ESG investing. And so it's actually, my... to be read on the plane, to finish on the plane, which is something we can talk about later, but it's a more hot topic these days. So we kind of take the history of value growth to like modern day with ESG investing, etc. And then on the second half of the course, we look up into what's called quantitative or rules-based investing. So that you may hear about index funds or rules-based, index strategies, which just follow a formula, or like I buy the 500 largest companies and I just track what's called the S&P 500, US stock market by just holding those 500 stocks. And there's some legendary firms out there, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, that have amassed now trillions. So the book is called Trillions, as you could guess, and how the sort of Wall Street renegades, the people who are using formulas, right, or index funds instead of like the traditional form of investing, have changed finance forever. So that's the next book in January. Then we have another book on quants. Quants are like math whiz or nerdy, more academics that then go to Wall Street and they kind of destroy it. I'm kidding, but they sort of try to solve the market or try to figure out what is it that works in with math and statistical tools, and launch sort of this quant revolution. And then there's a biography of a very well-known quant manager called Jim Simons. And then finally, we are also looking into the future. We have a book around this, digital assets and decentralized finance, which is called The Future of Money. And we literally just hosted the author of that book as one of the keynotes of our investing conference at the Mayo Center. So I was very lucky to read the book and then invite the author and have a conversation as well with the students in October. So that's kind of the list of books. I enjoy the course a lot for a number of reasons. I don't do most of the work again. The students do the work. They will meet with me this Monday, for example, and they go through their plan to facilitate the session. And so I'm curious, like I've shared with them The Economist article because the next book is on ESG, and I'm curious what's their current take on ESG from the book, from other readings, other articles that I've shared with the students. But it's on them to like lead us for is it 4 hours, I believe? So, of a full evening program. And we do this actually at the historical farm in rural Virginia, which is beautiful to do this. And we'll have break for dinner and, do all these unique things. So this class is small because of the high touch aspect of it. So I only have 12 to 14 students per year. But again, you apply for this class, as Brad said, at the end of the first year, such that you can take this class through your second year.
Well, I think what you just shared there gives us a natural entree into talking about ESG and your interest in what you mentioned earlier, environmental, social, and governance in investing. You also teach a hot topic elective, hot topics in finance, and no doubt ESG is part of that, as you mentioned. And it feels like the conversation here in the U.S. around ESG, particularly in the past week or so, has really started to percolate. So how did you get interested in ESG?
Yeah, so some of it, as Brad pointed out, is also from our alumni in the space. So I had another elective which I teach, which is called Hot Topics in Finance. And, the more I asked alumni to come back and basically teach current topics in finance, many of them started talking about ESG. And as you said, it's very much in the news in the US. There are many controversies around investment managers, whether they're doing ESG or not. On the corporate side as well, you might have heard Elon Musk, tweet about that ESG is a scam after Tesla was cut from the major S&P ESG index. There's some regulatory actions. The SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, is going over greenwashing with some asset managers. So the question is, what is supposed, and so, same here in Europe. There's been regulators going after Deutsche Asset Management in the UK, etc. So what is ESG? Let's sort through those words. So the idea is that increasingly you have to go beyond the financial data, the traditional, what's traditionally reflected in traditional accounting. And that's still what we teach in the core, right? We still teach traditional not traditional, but modern accounting, I should say. And we also teach traditional, valuation of companies through our, first year finance course. But that might be missing other things, and that's where ESG comes in. What is it missing? The companies may have environmental footprints. How? So that's the E for environment. Carbon footprint, the carbon emissions of those companies, or other pollutions or resource usage. So those are environmental, that we call them externalities, or things that the company's operations affect others, in particular the natural environment first. On the social dimension, there are many social concerns, a firm's relations with its workforce, with its customers, with the communities it operates on. And those have risen all over the world, many issues particularly now around the pandemic, for example, how companies treat their workers, how in their communities, etc. And then finally, governance, G, and that's how the companies align with the interest of shareholders. How independent is the board? How are management incentives? And sort of the ESG idea is to capture what other factors and risks might be there on the environmental, social, and governance dimension that we need to address when we think about investing. And the idea is that many of these things could have been addressed by the government, like, let's say, climate change, or to stay with the most controversial but we're not making enough progress on this. So we're kind of leveraging the private capital to achieve those sustainable. So you also hear the word sustainable, responsible. ESG is sort of encompassing all this. So on the one hand, you have investors who are now managing more and more assets according to these ESG principles I'll talk about later. But you also have, corporations talking about ESG, or when they talk about what is the purpose of the corporation, how does it handle its customers, employees, suppliers, and communities, so the stakeholders of the company, or should it just be there for shareholders? So that's how I would frame ESG. And for me, it's been, of course, many ESG high-profile scandals have occurred in throughout many years. Like here in Europe, Volkswagen had the Dieselgate emission test scandal. You had oil spills in the US, like BP Horizon. You had, Facebook with its data privacy breach, or Wirecard fraud here in Europe. And so there's been a lot of controversies, and the pandemic has also, added a few. So I went and my own journey into this was, I was asked by the CFA Institute to write a report on ESG and responsible investing around the world. And I took a look at over, several hundred academic papers on this, but also, looked into what is the list of ESG issues, what are ESG standards, how do you measure these things, what's most important. So what I came out with was climate change seems to be the most important. And there's the physical risk of climate, like the losses as that materializes, but also the transition risk of how we adapt in the technologies, from oil and gas to renewables, and so investors care about that, not just for those risks, but also for the third risk, I would say, is regulation. They worry, that the EU here has a European Green Deal. And the US is also talking, the SEC is now also coming out, and the Department of Labor on the pension assets. So there's a lot of, things one does. But as I said, institutional investors that we talked about asset management, they are now the largest in markets. As I said before, over half of shares are held by these money managers rather than investing directly. And 75% over in the US. So they care a lot. First, they cared a lot about G. Why? G is sort of our corporate governance. It's how do you kind of get your money back? It's what's protecting the money to come back? Like, what's the board? Is the board representing shareholders, etc.? How is management incentivized? And then they look at how do I actually make sure I get that my voice into the corporation. So I could definitely, if I don't like something, I can exit the company, sell my shares. But increasingly, companies are starting to use voice. Investors are starting to use voice, engaging with management, voting their shares, and so forth. So the panel I was sitting in right there here in Barcelona was around shareholder engagement of how is this done and what is the academic evidence? Does this work or not work? So the people gathered around here at the conference center, do they make a change or not make a change in actual how companies operate? How is it outside the US? How is it in the US? And so forth. So they've made progress. I would say that's been the genesis is mostly on G, but now you have a new focus on environment and social, the ENS over ESG. And sometimes it's also called corporate social responsibility, sort of the social responsibility. And we actually have one of our thought leaders in ESG, which is Ed Freeman, my colleague at Darden, who coined the word stakeholder theory, which is the idea that organizations must take other, stakeholder groups into account. The question as a finance academic is, are you doing this at the cost of shareholders, or are you actually enhancing value to the shareholders as well? And that's very much an open debate academically of, are you doing well by doing good or not? And there's still a lot there in terms of, which I won't get into, but it's sort of the object of study. It's do you do well because you can afford to do good, or is it after you've done well, then you're able to do good, or do those two things happen together? That's really a very large thing. So what I did is, because there was all these questions around, I said, who is the organization out there that is actually doing ESG investing? So that's when I ran into the PRI, this Principles for Responsible Investing. They're United Nations sponsored. They're the largest global network on institutional investors, over 3,000 signatories, over 100 trillion in AUM. I already lost count of the numbers because they were updating me. I think it's 130 trillion or whatever. And that first principle of PRI is that principle number one is we will incorporate ESG issues into investment strategies and decision-making processes. So that's principle number one, is we will take this ESG into our investment. Principle number two is we engage with the companies and as I said, I was speaking to that on that panel. And for me, most importantly, is the last principle, which is we will report the data. We will actually show you every year in, year out, what progress we're making. So I was able to study it based on all the reporting data. And that's what's featured in The Economist this weekend, is that different investors, report different levels of how much they're incorporating. How do they incorporate? Sometimes they screen out some stocks like tobacco, guns, etc. Sometimes they screen in some stocks, best-in-class stocks. Sometimes they just change the whole research or valuation to incorporate these ESG factors, and sometimes they engage with the company. So they do all these different things, and what do we find is that, we find that Europeans do and walk more the talk. So their portfolios perform more better in ESG because of this. But the core finding is, not so much for the US. So there's a gap between US signatories, their claims on ESG investing versus their actual practice of ESG investing. And that's kind of where I should stop at one point, and not because I get super excited about all my research. But question number one is who's doing this? It grew out of Europe and many other places, but now it's very big in the US. Question two: because they've signed these principles, do they do anything different? Yes, on average they do, but less so among the US signatories. And number three is what sort of explains these differences? And that's where the journalists may not get that third point, because it takes a while, is that there are reasons why ESG investing may be behind the curve in the US compared to other markets. But there, you have to actually read the article, right? You actually have to go beyond that, top line in the newspaper and drill down. So I stopped there. But that's kind of been my journey into ESG investing.
All right, so we got a few more minutes here, Pedro. I want to ask a couple more questions. So this is a little bit of a hot topic question. There's been a lot of commentary about ESG being kind of the flavor of the week, passing fad. Where do you think that this is going? Do you think it's here to stay? Too soon to tell? What do you think?
I think it's here to stay, but we're in this moment of reckoning right now. I don't want to get any political in this, but in the US, you have people claiming ESG is woke, or that ESG is politically aligned with a particular part of the spectrum, and some people completely, ESG is the only tool we have for addressing all the social and environmental problems. But I think we are at the stage where organizations like the PRI, my own work, and many others in academia, the regulators, and many people are taking an honest look at what is it that we're actually achieving, how much progress have we actually made, and is it really delivering on that sustainable goals. Or is it detracting from actually us, meaning collectively as societies, asking our elected officials, et cetera, to actually tackle these problems? And so ESG is really, this is, as you said, it's very hot topic. We had, I just didn't know this would also come up in the economics for me, but it's something that I think, we also bring to the classroom. As I said, I had originally brought in through the alumni that work, very, very top alumni we have in this space. But also our students are working in these topics themselves. We're offering courses in this topic, and I think it's some people claim that the future of investing is sustainable investing, and the reason is, if I had to throw one-liner at this, is you're kind of investing into a world you want to retire into, so you have to make sure that world exists. So that is like the climate is, and the social, and everything around you is a world worth retiring into. So what's the purpose of, going back to the mission of the center a little bit? What is the purpose of it's the preservation and growth of wealth for investors, but you have to, to spend that wealth it has to be in a world you want to live in. So you have to deal with all these externalities. And my sense is, particularly with the new generation, that they're very passionate about this. I'm not as equally passionate as the next people after me, right? Because they're the ones that are going to live in that planet more than I am. And so every time I'm in the classroom and every time I speak to our students, I hear a lot more passion into these topics than the ones I personally have.
It's an interesting point about this being sort of a private market solution to things that large public actors have been challenged to solve. You mentioned climate change, these kind of major things that are very top of mind.
Yeah, it's kind of using the power of the purse, the power of money to encourage behavior that is more environmentally sustainable or more socially sustainable. And it's still question mark. Where are we at, early stages of this? But I'm extremely excited about these topics and being clean and honest about it, that it's not just a marketing spin or a flavor of the day type of thing, but it's really a sustainable investing approach.
Last question here for you, Pedro. We talked about a lot of books here, but some folks may have listened to this conversation and been, gosh, I would love to learn more about some of the things that have been discussed. Are there any books you'd recommend? We generally ask for 3 books that you would recommend. So any further reading?
Oh, sure. So I have the books I was mentioning in the reading seminar. I picked 3 perhaps from those. The kind of one book I really liked was this new book on private markets called The Power Law. This is something I was not studying myself, but which is the growth beyond public markets. All the platform companies that we talked about, the Facebooks, Apple, Amazon, and all, they all came out of kind of a Silicon Valley venture capital approach. So I was very interested in this book. It's been shortlisted by the Financial Times as a book of the year. I don't know if it will win, but it's really well research. It's a little bit long, close to 500 pages, but it's very worthwhile your time. I'm reading this new book on ESG investing, which is called Sustainable: Moving Beyond ESG to Impact Investing. That's a topic I'm more interested, given all I just said. And then the third book, it's called Trillions: How a Band of Wall Street Renegades Invented the Index Fund and Changed Finance Forever. That book was very highly rated at the end of last year, and that is the revolution of indexing and so forth. So those 3 books, I can go on forever because and then Bob and others, Bob Brunner's, who are voracious readers, they would give you 50 books. But I think, staying with hot topics, one is the growth of private markets, which we did not talk too much today, but other experts at Darden and many classes on that. And the second is what I'm more an expert on, which is ESG investing. And number 3 is the growth of indexing and growth of passive managed. That last book called Trillions.
Well, thank you, Pedro. We covered so much ground here. And to our attendees, hopefully this was thought-provoking. It was interesting. It's been wonderful to host these faculty conversations. We've got a couple more coming up in December, a little bit later this month. So hopefully we'll see you online for those. And as always, if you're curious about this conversation, you want to go back and listen to it all over again, it will be out on our admissions podcast, Experience Darden, and Exec MBA podcast in the coming weeks. So Pedro, safe travels back to the U.S. and to our attendees. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. This was really fun. Thank you.
And that was my conversation with Pedro Matos, Professor of Business Administration and the Academic Director for the Richard A. Mayo Center for Asset Management here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe Be well, and thanks for listening.